The air above Western Europe during the years of 1942 through 1945 was not simply empty sky. It was a layered landscape, a vast, freezing wilderness meticulously mapped by the currents of the jet stream and perforated by the savage, electric bursts of anti-aircraft fire. It was a domain defined by absolute, suffocating darkness, broken only by the thin slivers of moonlight reflecting off frozen wing surfaces and the distant, constant glow of the infernos they sought to create on the ground far below. This was the nocturnal theater of the Allied strategic bombing campaign, an operation of staggering logistical and human cost, where young men navigated by starlight and primitive radar, pushing the limits of both man and machine. Within this theater of high-stakes flight, where operational survival rates often plummeted to terrifying lows, certain events transcended the routine horror of war. These were incidents that defied the meticulous record-keeping of Bomber Command and the 8th Air Force, slipping out of the grasp of logical explanation. They became chilling footnotes, stories whispered in the smoky confines of Nissen huts, eventually codified into enduring mysteries that challenge the very structure of the historical narrative. These 5 enigmas, 5 instances where reality seemed to tear at the seams, offer a profound look into the unknown pressures and covert operations intrinsic to the war effort fought high above the Reich. Our investigation begins not with a crash nor a battle, but with the sudden, impossible non-existence of a massive airframe, the silent demise. Imagine the Operational Research Section ORS bunker, miles beneath the relative peace of rural England, the air thick with the smell of stale tea and graphite pencils. Here, the progress of the night's bomber stream, hundreds of aircraft moving in a staggered, flowing column, was tracked on vast plotting boards. Each tiny symbol represented an Avro Lancaster, a flying fortress, or a Halifax, a vessel carrying 7 or 10 souls and tons of high explosive. On the night in question, the target was the dense, smokestack heart of the Ruhr Valley, the industrial engine of Hitler's Germany, referred to ominously by the crews as the Happy Valley, due to the sheer density of anti-aircraft defenses it housed. The Lancaster, a mighty aircraft known for its endurance and load capacity, was the backbone of this offensive. The crew in question, let us call her M for ease of tracking, had crossed the enemy coast, navigated the initial nervous flak zones, and was proceeding steadily toward the target zone, reported to be maintaining a precise altitude of 18,000 feet, right in the thick of the high-altitude turbulence. The bomber stream was tight, a necessary defensive measure, but one that carried the constant threat of mid-air collision in the absolute blackness. The silent demise, however, was not the result of a visible collision or the terrifying spectacle of a bomber exploding from a direct flak hit. Events that, horrific as they were, left clear evidence: distress calls, secondary explosions, or scattered debris signatures on the radar screen. This particular vanishing was reported across 2 separate tracking systems almost simultaneously, occurring roughly an hour and 40 minutes into the flight, just as the aircraft was nearing the crucial target marker. The initial report came from the onboard H-2S radar operator, the navigator who managed the ground mapping set, of the Lancaster flying immediately behind M. He later filed a sworn statement describing the target's echo, a precise, steady blip on his green, glowing circular scope. The texture of the air, the vibration of the cockpit floor, everything was normal. And then, without so much as a preceding flicker, the blip was simply gone. Not fading, not scattering, but replaced instantly by the empty, slightly shimmering background noise of the set. The navigator strained, rotating the antenna, checking the gain, expecting the echo to reappear, having perhaps drifted momentarily into the blind cone of the radar. It did not return. Concurrently, the monitoring station tracking the general movement of the stream registered the loss. Crucially, the airwaves remained silent. There was no desperate, clipped voice over the radio, No transmission of the official distress code, Mayday, nor the simple single-word declaration of disaster, Tally-ho, used by stricken crews jettisoning their loads. The microphone of the missing aircraft remained keyed off. The radio operator, sitting in the cramped, cold space amidst his glowing equipment, had not time, or perhaps the ability, to reach his transmitter key. This sudden erasure presented a devastating technical conundrum. For a four-engined bomber to disappear so completely and silently, the structural failure had to be instantaneous and absolute. Theories ranged from the catastrophic, a highly focused, highly accurate burst from a newly deployed German radar-guided flak battery, a Schwere battery, designed to sever the fuselage entirely, or a complete, simultaneous failure of all four engines, resulting in a sudden, unrecoverable stall and subsequent plunge. Yet even a stall or structural breakup usually offered a crew a few precious, horrifying seconds to transmit something, anything. The most persistent and chilling theory concerning the silent demise centers on the possibility of a direct hit by a revolutionary experimental German air-to-air missile, perhaps launched from a night fighter operating far below the stream. Intelligence reports, often dismissed as rumor or exaggeration, spoke of weapons guided by proximity fuses, capable of detonating not upon contact, but within a precise destructive distance, delivering a shockwave tailored to cause maximum structural integrity failure across the aircraft's most vulnerable points. Such a weapon, hitting the center mass of the Lancaster, could have compressed the entire fuselage, instantly knocking out power, radio, and life support, rendering the whole aircraft a rapidly decelerating mass of freezing metal, tumbling silently into the void. The crew was officially listed as missing, presumed killed on active service. There was no wreckage located, no confirmed debris field, even in the intensive post-war surveys of the target area. The Avro Lancaster and its 7 inhabitants simply ceased to participate in the conflict, leaving behind only an impossible blank space where a massive machine had been seconds before. The silent demise remains a testament to the brutal, unforgiving speed with which the darkness could claim its sacrifices, leaving historians and military analysts with nothing but the cold, verifiable fact of an instantaneous, uncommunicated loss. Moving now from the horror of instant disintegration to the more insidious, calculated threat of deception, we examine the riddle of the ghost target. The strategic bombing campaign demanded accuracy, but precision in the dense blackness of night at high altitude was a relative concept. Nonetheless, Bomber Command invested immense effort and risk into the photographic reconnaissance missions that followed every major strike. These post-strike sorties, flown often in the freezing dawn hours by specialized Mosquito aircraft, were designed to capture the truth on film: the pattern of destruction, the efficacy of the bombing run, and crucially, the confirmation that the valuable payload had hit the intended target. The mystery of the ghost target materialized as a pattern of deeply troubling photographic evidence across multiple major raids between 1943 and 1944. Mission objectives were detailed, usually targeting specific, high-priority industrial nodes, a major hydroelectric dam, a highly guarded V-weapon construction facility, or the sprawling rail yards essential for troop transport. The coordinates issued to the navigators were precise, derived from top-secret intelligence gathered from captured documents, SOE ground observations, or, most commonly, the highly sensitive and deeply compartmented ultra-signals intelligence. The operational details for these ghost target missions were impeccable. Crews reported clear conditions upon approach, successful deployment of marker flares by the Pathfinder force, and the resulting master bomber calls confirming the saturation of the designated aiming point. Hundreds of heavy bombs, the thudding, earth-shattering high explosives, and the blinding, liquid fire incendiaries were dropped. The sheer expenditure of fuel, ordnance, and human effort was massive. Yet, the next morning, the reconnaissance photos would tell a different story. Instead of the telltale smoke plumes and shattered infrastructure confirming a successful strike on the designated armaments factory or oil refinery, the camera lenses captured images of open, undisturbed farmland, or sometimes bomb craters scattered around a collection of derelict pre-war ruins, structures of no strategic value whatsoever. In one notorious case, targeting a supposed panzer assembly line near Kiel, the reconnaissance team found only a completely annihilated medieval ruin, miles from any modern construction, surrounded by potato fields. The factory was untouched. The analysis of this discrepancy drove operational planners to the brink of paranoia. It implied one of two disastrous conclusions. Either the highly trained navigators of the Pathfinder force were systematically misidentifying the primary target, an impossible failure rate given the technological tools and rigorous standards employed, or, far worse, that the target coordinates themselves, the very foundation of the mission plan, were deliberately corrupted at the highest echelons of command. This raised the uncomfortable specter of deeply embedded espionage or systematic intelligence sabotage. If the coordinates derived from Ultra, the most sensitive and supposedly secure source, were being tampered with before they reached the briefing room, it meant an enemy agent had penetrated the deepest strata of Allied operations. Consider the complexity of the sabotage required. The espionage would not merely involve leaking information. It necessitated substituting false, highly plausible, but non-strategic coordinates that would fool the briefing staff, the navigators utilizing dead reckoning and celestial observation, and the specialized radio operators responsible for encrypted target data. This mole would have access to the most compartmentalized target selection documents, an impossible position for all but a handful of individuals. The competing theory, often favored by the intelligence community later in the war, was that the Germans were running an extraordinarily successful counter-deception campaign. They might have been operating dummy industrial sites, elaborate camouflage and decoy structures, but the evidence of the ghost target suggested something more sophisticated. The coordinates provided were often geographically precise to the point of absurdity, aiming at specific corners of large buildings that should have been verifiable on the ground mapping radar. The true, chilling nature of the ghost target mystery lies in the realization that every one of these wasted missions carried the full complement of risk. Crews were lost to flak, to night fighters, and to operational accidents, their sacrifice yielding absolutely zero strategic benefit to the war effort. Their blood was spilt attacking an empty field, a ruined abbey, or a harmless stretch of forest. The deliberate nature of this intelligence failure, whether orchestrated by a foreign power or an internal leak, suggests a meticulous, long-term operation of profound strategic value to the enemy, costing the Allies hundreds of aircraft and thousands of irreplaceable men. The identity of the saboteur or the mechanism of the deception remains one of the bitterest unresolved questions of Bomber Command's history, a silent betrayal hidden within the piles of photographic evidence. Our narrative now shifts continents and command structures, moving from the dark complexity of RAF night operations to the slightly higher altitudes and daytime precision tactics of the USAAF's 8th Air Force. However, as the war progressed and deep penetration strikes into Germany became routine, the 8th Air Force also found itself fighting under the cover of night, or more accurately, operating at altitudes and times where conventional atmospheric phenomena could not explain what their crews were witnessing. This brings us to the most visually unsettling and often culturally sensationalized mystery, the Foo Fighters phenomenon. The term itself, Foo Fighter, was coined by the crews of the 415th Night Fighter Squadron in late 1944. The environment in which these men operated was already hyper-alert and deeply stressful. They were flying B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators, lumbering beasts of aluminum through the thin, biting air high above 25,000 feet, often without fighter escort, deep into the Reich. The cold was unbearable. Ice crystals coated the interior bulkheads. and the crew's breath immediately froze onto the Perspex windows, demanding constant scraping. The silence in the unheated nose section was only punctuated by the monotonous drone of the engines and the intermittent hiss of the oxygen system. It was into this electrically charged, sensory-deprived environment that the Foo Fighters made their dramatic entrance. Crews did not report enemy aircraft, they reported lights. These lights were described with unnerving consistency across different squadrons, different aircraft types, and different geographic locations, ruling out simple pilot error or local atmospheric conditions. The objects were reported as glowing spheres, typically 6 inches to several feet in diameter, pulsating with intense, non-standard colors, dazzling orange, icy blue, and vivid, vibrant green. Crucially, they were not static, they moved. Flight engineers, gunners, and navigators, hardened men who had seen their share of exploding aircraft and terrifying flak displays, swore that these spheres demonstrated intelligent control and impossible speed. They would appear suddenly, often off the wingtip or directly ahead, seemingly pace the massive bomber formation for minutes on end, matching its velocity of hundreds of miles per hour despite high winds and turbulence. The sensory details provided by the eyewitness accounts are staggering in their uniformity. They were often described as having a metallic sheen beneath the luminescence, but they emitted no discernible heat, left no contrail, and, most unnervingly, appeared to defy the inertial physics of high-altitude flight. They performed sharp, instantaneous maneuvers that no known German aircraft, certainly not the jet-powered Messerschmitt Me-262, which was already taxing Allied assumptions, could replicate. They would accelerate instantly into the blackness, or simply blink out of existence. The crucial question posed by commanders was, were these German secret weapons? Were they radio-controlled decoys designed to distract gunners, or perhaps some form of high-altitude, proximity-fused explosive? Intelligence units, particularly those tasked with evaluating captured German technological blueprints, investigated every possibility. They examined reports of Kugelblitz, ball lightning, atmospheric weapons, and advanced propellerless prototypes. However, the energy source required to power such high-velocity, sustained spheres at extreme altitude and the method for remotely controlling them were far beyond the capabilities attributed to the Luftwaffe in 1944. Furthermore, the objects never showed overt hostility. They tracked, they shadowed, but they never fired, crashed into the formation, or caused electronic interference beyond a general feeling of unease. The USAAF official report summarized the sightings as unidentified aerial phenomena and, due to the lack of aggressive action, tentatively concluded they were likely optical illusions, St. Elmo's fire, an electrical discharge on wingtips, or perhaps extreme forms of meteorological anomalies like ball lightning interacting with the bomber's high-frequency radar emissions. Yet, this explanation failed to satisfy the men who stared directly at the lights. They were professional airmen, trained observers whose lives depended on their ability to distinguish between a spark and a Messerschmitt. They described the Foo Fighters as moving against the wind, performing tight right-angle turns, and maintaining a position relative to the B-17 that suggested deliberate tracking. The fear they instilled was not based on perceived threat, but on sheer incomprehension, the feeling that they were being observed and judged by something operating entirely outside the known framework of the war. The Foo Fighters phenomenon remains a chilling study in perception and reality in extreme duress. While post-war analysis often lumps these sightings into the broader category of unidentified flying objects, the specific context, the freezing, electric atmosphere high above wartime Germany, the consistent descriptions of coordinated movement, and the complete lack of physical explanation seals its status as Lana's WW2's most profound operational mysteries. The airman's testimony, etched in the freezing fear of the high altitudes, insists that something was sharing the hostile skies with them, and it was neither friend nor foe, but an impossible, glowing observer. Our fourth mystery is one of solitude and identity, rooted not in the chaos of battle, but in a remote discovery in occupied territory, the unidentified navigator.
The recovery occurred months after a major raid, deep in the heavily guarded zones of the Low Countries, far from the established lines of air combat. Local resistance operatives, conducting surveillance near a forested marshland, stumbled upon the fragmented remains of an aircraft, highly dispersed, suggesting a mid to high altitude catastrophic breakup, perhaps due to structural fatigue or a sudden devastating flak burst. The wreckage was identifiable as Allied, pieces of aluminum structure and identifiable fragments of American-made gear. What truly arrested the investigation, however, was the discovery of a single set of human remains, largely intact due to the marshy ground, belonging to an Allied airman. Initial assumptions were that this was a standard crew member from a known lost bomber, perhaps thrown clear upon impact, but detailed examination quickly revealed profound, unsettling contradictions. The man was clearly a navigator, based on the presence of a delicate, damaged Dalton computer, a circular slide rule essential for calculating wind drift and ground speed, recovered near his body, and a fragmented, highly specialized map case containing charts marked with non-standard navigational routes. These routes did not align with any known major strategic bombing mission for the time frame in question. The map lines indicated a solitary, circuitous path, suggesting either a highly secretive reconnaissance run or a flight path related to the insertion or extraction of ground agents. The true enigma lay in his clothing and gear. The airman was clad in high-quality, worn leather, a flight jacket of a cut and texture familiar to USAAF crews, but conspicuously lacking the standard leather patch where name, rank, and unit insignia would be affixed. Furthermore, beneath the jacket, his uniform was non-standard issue. He wore an experimental, tightly insulated undersuit, clearly designed for maximum thermal protection at extreme altitudes. His boots were not the standard heavy fleece-lined flying boots, but a prototype, thinner but heavily rubberized design intended for quiet movement on the ground, a crucial detail suggesting a planned landing or bailing out, with an emphasis on remaining undetected. Most damningly, the man carried absolutely no form of personal or military identification. No dog tags were found, no unit crests, no rank insignia. Even the serial numbers, usually discreetly stamped on his helmet lining and oxygen mask assembly, had been meticulously filed away or scraped off. He was, professionally speaking, a ghost, a soldier whose existence was intentionally expunged from all accessible records. The official military inquiry struggled to place him. His dental records were vague, perhaps deliberately so, or simply non-existent in the operational theater files. The experimental nature of his gear suggested affiliation with a highly specialized, black-budget program. Was he part of the OSS, Office of Strategic Services, flying solo missions to drop agents or supplies far behind enemy lines, utilizing clandestine airfields? His navigator status would be essential for such precise lone wolf operations. The location of his discovery, miles off any known bomber stream route, reinforced the theory of a singular, highly classified mission. The question remains, if his plane was shot down, who else was aboard, and what was the mission so critical that every effort was made to strip the crew of identity, ensuring that if they fell anonymously? The unidentified navigator is not just a case of a missing person. It is a physical piece of evidence confirming the existence of operations that operated outside the rigid, documented structure of the air war. It speaks to the uncomfortable truth that for every 1,000 men lost in the recorded fury of a saturation bombing raid, there were others lost in the surgical, silent, and entirely deniable conflicts of espionage and deep reconnaissance. The airman's worn leather jacket,
anonymous and devoid of marks, became a chilling shroud, concealing a secret mission that remains buried with him in the European soil.
Finally, we turn to a mystery rooted in the unseen electromagnetic spectrum, a puzzle heard only by the sensitive ears of Allied monitoring stations, the Phantom Abort Code.
The communication networks supporting the massive bomber streams were vast and complex, relying on intricate schedules, coded language, and established frequency hops. Every message, from weather reports to target confirmations, was logged, encrypted, and recorded. The integrity of this communication was paramount, as it governed the lives of thousands of men and the success of million-dollar operations.
The monitoring stations, often populated by WAFs, Women's Auxiliary Air Force, with trained patient ears, were responsible for logging every whisper of radio traffic.
These women were the silent auditors of the night sky. Their concentration focused entirely on the metallic hiss and pop of static, waiting for the familiar cadence of a human voice or the rhythmic tap of Morse code. Beginning in the middle of 1944, a recurring anomaly began to appear in the high-frequency radio bands dedicated to operational traffic. It was not a voice transmission, nor was it standard Morse code. It was a rapid, short burst of highly encrypted tones, a sequence of electronic pulses, sharp and brief, lasting perhaps only 3 or 4 seconds.
These bursts were recorded at intermittent times, always coinciding with the late stages of a major mission, specifically just as the bomber stream was making its final approach to the initial point, IP, before the target run.
These signals were immediately flagged because they did not conform to any recognized Allied communications protocol. The frequency used was technically within the Allied operational band, but the encryption sequence was unknown. And the signal originated by triangulated measurement from deep within occupied territory, sometimes from the ground, sometimes from an airborne source moving rapidly. The function of this signal, quickly nicknamed the Phantom Code by analysts, was deduced from its effect. When these encrypted bursts were recorded, several aircraft in the target stream, without official instruction from the master bomber or ground control, would suddenly alter course, jettisoning their bomb loads in designated emergency areas, in effect, initiating a mission abort. They did this without acknowledging the master bomber's calls or utilizing the standard official radio channels for acknowledging mission status change. This suggested an entirely separate, highly covert mechanism for recalling missions. But who was sending the signal and why? Initial suspicion fell on German radio countermeasures, a highly sophisticated attempt to inject false command signals into the Allied stream, hoping to cause chaos or divert the attack. However, the subsequent analysis of the mission aborts revealed a startling pattern. The missions recalled by the Phantom Code were, in several key instances, missions heading directly into heavy, previously unknown German defensive traps. In one example, a mission targeting an electrical grid near Leipzig was aborted by a handful of aircraft after the Phantom Code burst was received. Subsequent analysis of the crews who proceeded to the target revealed they were met by an overwhelming force of newly deployed German night fighters operating from a clandestine airfield. The crews that aborted survived. Those who continued suffered devastating losses. The Phantom Code had saved lives, acting as an advanced, almost immediate warning system that circumvented the official chain of command.
This raised profound questions about the code's origin. It pointed to the terrifying possibility of an intelligence failure within the standard command structure.
Perhaps the realization that the Germans had successfully compromised the official communications ledger, necessitating a black channel, accessible only to a select few. The Phantom Code, then, was likely a crisis signal transmitted by a deep cover agent or a small, highly specialized Allied unit operating dangerously close to the enemy. With real-time knowledge of imminent danger that official channels were too slow or too compromised to handle.
The identity of the originator and the precise method of this transmission remain protected by layers of post-war military silence. It was a secret mechanism designed to operate in the shadows, a desperate technical measure to save crews from certain death when the standard system was untrustworthy.
It suggests a high-stakes electronic shadow war, fought not with bombs or bullets, but with rapid, encrypted tones, a covert lifeline operating just below the threshold of documented history, ensuring a few precious crews would survive the freezing darkness above the Reich. These 5 enigmas, the silent demise, the ghost target, the Foo Fighters phenomenon, the unidentified navigator, and the phantom abort code are more than just historical anecdotes. They are fissures in the carefully constructed facade of military certainty. They force us to confront the fact that the documented history of the air war, massive and detailed as it is inherently incomplete. The cold, high-altitude reality of the night bombing campaign was a crucible of extremes, where the margins for error were non-existent. The environment itself, the freezing spray on the perspex, the overwhelming, persistent roar of the 4 engines, the metallic stench of aviation fuel, and the constant, vibrating threat of death was conducive to anomalous occurrences and impossible failures. The vanished bomber that leaves no trace speaks to the utter fragility of these mighty machines. The phantom targets expose the vulnerability of the intelligence pipeline to insidious sabotage. The glowing spheres that track formations defy the conventional physics of the era, pushing the boundary of what was technologically possible or observable. The unidentified soldier reminds us of the sacrifices made in operations so secret they were never meant to be recorded. And the silent radio burst confirms the existence of a high-stakes game of electronic counterintelligence operating just outside the light.
These chilling footnotes, born in the darkest hours of the Second World War, persist because they refuse to be cleanly categorized. They are the spectral echoes of the monumental effort and the terrible, random sacrifice made in the desperate, freezing darkness above the Reich, challenging us still to decipher the full, complex truth of that high-altitude conflict. They remind us that even in the most meticulously planned military operation, the unknown waits, ready to consume both the physical evidence and the historical certainty.